Your perception of time isn't linear. It never was. And the moment you truly understand this, everything you thought you knew about creating change, manifesting outcomes, and transforming your life completely shifts. Because hidden beneath your conscious awareness, your subconscious mind is operating on a timeline system that most people never discover. A system where past, present, and future exist simultaneously, where every version of yourself across all possibilities is broadcasting signals into your current reality, and where the key to genuine transformation isn't found in doing more, but in learning how to navigate these invisible temporal codes. What you're about to discover isn't theory. It's not another manifestation technique or mindset hack. This is the revelation of how your subconscious actually organizes reality through what I call subconscious timelines. And once you see this hidden architecture, once you understand how to work with these quantum blueprints instead of against them, you don't just change your circumstances. You literally step into a completely different version of your existence that was always available but remained locked behind your current timeline programming. Most people live trapped in what I call the default timeline. This is the reality track where everything feels predetermined, where patterns repeat endlessly, where you work harder and harder but keep hitting the same invisible ceiling. You know this feeling. It's that sense that no matter how much you grow, learn, or try to change, something keeps pulling you back to familiar struggles, familiar limitations, familiar versions of yourself that you thought you'd outgrown. But here's what changes everything. That pull isn't coming from your past, it's coming from your future. Or more precisely, from a specific future timeline that your subconscious has been programmed to expect, to move toward, to recreate over and over again. Your subconscious mind doesn't just store memories, it stores timeline blueprints, energetic templates of every possible version of your life, every potential outcome, every road you could take. And right now, without your conscious awareness, it's navigating toward one specific timeline trajectory based on the deepest programming it carries. This programming wasn't installed by affirmations or conscious thoughts. It was installed through emotional imprinting, through repetition, through the vibrational signature of your most formative experiences. And here's the part that will blow your mind. These timeline codes aren't just personal, they're generational, ancestral, collective. You're not just carrying your own timeline programming. You're carrying forward patterns, expectations, and reality blueprints that have been passed down through your lineage, absorbed from your culture, inherited from versions of reality that your family, your community, your entire ancestral line has been recreating for generations. This is why some people seem to effortlessly attract abundance, while others struggle despite doing all the right things. This is why certain individuals naturally magnetize healthy relationships while others keep recreating the same painful dynamics. This is why breakthrough feels impossible for some and inevitable for others. They're operating from different subconscious timeline codes, different reality blueprints, different future trajectories that their deeper mind is programmed to expect and create. But here's where it gets really interesting. Every timeline exists simultaneously. The version of your life where you struggle financially and the version where you thrive abundantly. The timeline where relationships drain you and the timeline where love flows effortlessly. The reality where your potential stays locked and the reality where your gifts fully express. They're all real. They're all broadcasting. They're all available right now. The only question is which timeline your subconscious is tuned to receive and recreate. Think about quantum physics for a moment. Scientists have discovered that at the subatomic level, particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until they're observed. The act of observation collapses the quantum field into one specific reality. Your consciousness works the same way. Every moment, you're collapsing infinite possibilities into one experienced reality based on what your subconscious mind is programmed to observe, to expect, to recognize as real and possible for you. Most people never realize they have this power because they've never been taught how subconscious timeline programming actually works. They think change happens through willpower, through positive thinking, through taking action in the external world. But timeline shifting happens at a much deeper level. It happens through what I call frequency alignment. Through learning how to tune your subconscious field to the vibrational signature of the timeline you actually want to experience. Your current reality is nothing more than your subconscious mind's best interpretation of which timeline trajectory you're supposed to be on based on its programming. Change the programming and you literally shift timelines. Not metaphorically, actually, because time isn't linear and your subconscious knows this even if your conscious mind doesn't. Let me show you something that might feel impossible until you experience it yourself. Right now, as you're listening to this, there's a version of you living in a completely different timeline. A version where your biggest current challenge has already been resolved. A version where your dreams have already materialized. A version where you've already become the person you're trying to grow into. That version exists. They're real. They're living their life right now in a parallel timeline trajectory. And here's the secret that changes everything. That version of you is also aware of you. They can feel you. They're sending you signals, guidance, inspiration, downloads of information about how they navigated from where you are now to where they exist. But you can't receive their transmission because your subconscious timeline programming is tuned to a different frequency. You're broadcasting and receiving on the channel of struggle, limitation, and familiar patterns instead of the channel of expansion, flow, and actualized potential. This is why meditation sometimes gives you glimpses of clarity that feel like downloads from a higher version of yourself. This is why certain books, conversations, or experiences feel like remembering rather than learning something new. This is why breakthrough moments often feel like stepping into a version of yourself that was always there waiting. Because they were. You were accessing, however briefly, a different timeline where that expanded version of you already exists. But here's where most people lose the thread. They touch that expanded timeline. They feel that higher version of themselves. But then they try to bring it into their current reality using their old timeline programming. They try to create timeline B results using timeline A methods, timeline A beliefs, timeline A emotional patterns. And it doesn't work. Not because the vision wasn't real, but because you can't sustain a new timeline reality with old timeline programming. This is the missing piece in most transformation work. People focus on changing their external circumstances without first shifting their internal timeline code. They try to manifest a new relationship while still carrying the timeline programming that created their relationship patterns. They work to build wealth while operating from ancestral timeline codes around money that have been running for generations. They attempt to express their full potential while remaining aligned with timeline programming that was installed when they learned to play small for safety. Timeline shifting requires a completely different approach. It requires learning how to identify which timeline programming is currently running your life, how to disconnect from timeline trajectories that no longer serve your evolution, and how to consciously align with the timeline where your highest potential is already actualized and broadcasting back to you. Your subconscious mind is like a radio receiver, constantly tuning into different timeline frequencies and collapsing them into your experienced reality. Right now, it's probably tuned to a mixture of timelines. Part of you might be aligned with expansion and growth, while another part is still tuned to limitation and familiar struggle. This creates what I call timeline interference. You make progress, then get pulled back. You have breakthroughs, then face familiar obstacles. You feel inspired and hopeful, then encounter the same old patterns showing up in new forms. This interference isn't resistance. It's not self-sabotage. It's simply your subconscious mind receiving mixed timeline signals and doing its best to create coherence from contradictory programming. The solution isn't to fight the interference. It's to achieve timeline clarity, to consciously choose which future trajectory you want to align with, and then reprogram your subconscious field to tune into that specific timeline frequency exclusively. But here's what makes this approach so different from traditional manifestation or personal development work. You're not trying to create something new. You're learning to align with something that already exists. You're not building a better future. You're stepping into a parallel present where your desires are already fulfilled, your challenges are already resolved, your potential is already expressing. This is why timeline work feels less like striving and more like remembering, less like becoming and more like returning. Because you're not creating a new version of yourself, you're accessing a version of yourself that was always there, always broadcasting, always available, just tuned out by timeline programming that kept you locked into familiar patterns and familiar limitations. The process begins with something most people skip entirely: timeline archaeology. Before you can shift into a new timeline, you need to understand the programming that's keeping you locked in your current one. This isn't about analyzing your past or processing trauma, though those can be valuable. Timeline archaeology is about identifying the specific codes, beliefs, expectations, and energetic patterns that your subconscious has been using to navigate reality. These codes were installed during what I call timeline imprinting moments. Experiences, usually in childhood, where your subconscious mind made decisions about how reality works, what's possible for you, what's safe, what patterns to expect and recreate. But here's what's crucial to understand. These weren't conscious decisions. They were energetic downloads that happened beneath your awareness, installing timeline programming that would shape your entire life trajectory without you ever knowing it was there. For example, maybe you witnessed your parents struggle financially, and your subconscious downloaded the timeline code that money is scarce and requires suffering to obtain. Or maybe you experienced abandonment and your subconscious installed programming that love is temporary and people always leave. Or perhaps you were criticized for expressing your natural gifts and your subconscious learned that being fully yourself isn't safe or acceptable. These timeline codes become the invisible software running your reality creation process. Your subconscious uses them to determine which possibilities to pay attention to, which opportunities to recognize, which outcomes to expect and move toward. And because they're operating beneath conscious awareness, you experience their effects as just how life is, instead of recognizing them as changeable programming. Timeline archaeology involves bringing these hidden codes into conscious awareness so you can see them clearly, understand their origins, and most importantly, recognize that they're not truth. They're not facts about reality. They're not permanent features of your personality or destiny. They're simply programming that was installed during specific moments and can be updated, replaced, or completely rewritten. But identification is just the first step. The real transformation happens through what I call timeline bridging. This is the process of consciously connecting with the version of yourself who already exists in the timeline where your desired reality is already actualized, not as visualization or fantasy, but as genuine energetic communication with a parallel version of your consciousness. Here's how this works. In quantum physics, there's a principle called non-locality, which means that particles can be connected across space and time, instantly affecting each other regardless of distance. Your consciousness works the same way. Every possible version of you across all timeline trajectories is quantum entangled with your current awareness. They're all accessible. They're all available for communication and alignment. Timeline bridging is the skill of establishing conscious contact with the specific version of yourself who has already navigated the path you're currently walking, who has already resolved the challenges you're facing, who has already integrated the lessons you're learning, who has already embodied the qualities you're developing. This version of you exists right now in a parallel timeline, and they have information, guidance, and energy that can completely transform your current experience. But this isn't about getting advice or receiving intellectual information. Timeline bridging involves what I call frequency transmission. Your higher timeline self broadcasts not just knowledge, but their entire energetic signature. Their confidence, their clarity, their way of perceiving reality, their emotional baseline, their vibrational state. When you establish genuine timeline bridge connection, you don't just learn from them. You begin to embody their frequency and naturally start operating from their level of consciousness. This is why timeline work often begins with what I call baseline elevation. Before you can access higher timeline versions of yourself, you need to raise your current vibrational baseline to a level where that connection becomes possible. This involves releasing the emotional charge from your current timeline programming, clearing the energetic residue from past timeline imprinting moments, and establishing a foundation of inner stability and coherence. Baseline elevation isn't about becoming perfect or resolving every issue in your life. It's about reaching what I call neutral coherence, a state where you're no longer being pulled around by unconscious timeline programming, where your emotional energy isn't constantly being drained by past patterns, where your consciousness is clear and stable enough to tune into higher frequency timeline transmissions. From this place of neutral coherence, timeline bridging becomes not just possible, but natural. You begin to feel the presence of your higher timeline selves. You start receiving downloads of information, inspiration, and guidance that feel like remembering rather than learning. You notice synchronicities and opportunities that align perfectly with your desired timeline trajectory. Most importantly, you begin to naturally embody qualities and capabilities that used to feel beyond your reach. But there's one more crucial element that determines whether timeline shifting becomes permanent or temporary: timeline anchoring. Many people successfully connect with higher versions of themselves, receive profound downloads, and experience temporary transformation, but then gradually slip back into their old timeline programming. This happens because they haven't learned how to anchor their new timeline alignment in their subconscious field. Timeline anchoring involves encoding your new timeline programming at the deepest levels of your subconscious mind. This isn't done through repetition or willpower. It happens through what I call identity integration. Your subconscious mind needs to fully recognize and accept your new timeline self as your true identity, not as a temporary experience or aspirational goal. This integration process involves several key components. First, timeline embodiment. You need to consistently live, think, feel, and act from your new timeline frequency until it becomes more familiar than your old patterns. Second, timeline evidence accumulation. Your subconscious needs concrete proof that your new timeline is real and sustainable, which comes through small but consistent manifestations that demonstrate your new programming is working. Third, timeline story revision. Your subconscious organizes reality around narrative coherence. You need to consciously rewrite the story of who you are, where you came from, and where you're going in a way that supports your new timeline identity. This isn't about denying your past. It's about recontextualizing your entire life experience from the perspective of your actualized timeline self. Finally, timeline field stabilization. You need to maintain your new timeline frequency consistently enough that it becomes your default state rather than something you access occasionally. This requires ongoing alignment practices, regular timeline bridge connections, and conscious attention to staying tuned to your chosen timeline trajectory, even when external circumstances fluctuate. When all these elements come together, something remarkable happens. Timeline shifting stops being something you do and becomes something you are. You no longer have to work to maintain your new reality. Your subconscious mind has fully integrated your new timeline programming and now automatically navigates toward outcomes, opportunities, and experiences that match your actualized timeline frequency. From this place, what used to feel impossible becomes inevitable. What used to require struggle starts flowing effortlessly. What used to feel like reaching for something external feels like expressing something that was always within you. Because you're no longer trying to create a new timeline, you've become the timeline. You've stepped fully into the parallel reality where your highest potential was always your natural expression. The hidden code of subconscious timelines isn't hidden because it's secret. It's hidden because most people are looking for transformation in the wrong places. They're trying to change their external circumstances without understanding the internal timeline programming that creates those circumstances. They're working on surface-level patterns without addressing the deeper timeline codes that generate those patterns. But once you understand this invisible architecture, once you learn to work directly with your subconscious timeline programming, transformation becomes less about effort and more about alignment, less about becoming someone new and more about returning to who you've always been in your highest timeline trajectory. Your current reality is just one possible timeline out of infinite options. Every limitation you're experiencing, every pattern you're stuck in, every ceiling you keep hitting exists only in this particular timeline trajectory. Parallel versions of you have already transcended every single challenge you're currently facing. They're not hoping you'll figure it out. They're actively broadcasting the solutions, the energy, the timeline codes that will lift you into their reality. The question isn't whether you can shift timelines. You're shifting every moment. The question is whether you'll do it consciously or unconsciously. Whether you'll keep defaulting to familiar timeline programming or step into the quantum field of infinite possibility where your highest potential timeline is always available, always broadcasting, always waiting for you to tune in and claim it as your new reality. This is your invitation. Not to create a better future, but to step into the parallel present where your desires are already fulfilled, where you've already become who you came here to be, where the hidden codes of your subconscious timelines are finally revealed and working in service of your highest evolution. The timeline where you thrive instead of survive is real. The timeline where your gifts flow effortlessly is accessible right now. The timeline where love, abundance, and authentic self-expression are your natural baseline isn't waiting for you to deserve it or earn it. It's waiting for you to recognize it, align with it, and anchor it as your permanent reality. Your subconscious timelines have been revealed. The code is in your hands. The question now is, which timeline will you choose to make real? Because whatever you choose, whatever timeline you align with and anchor, becomes not just your new reality, but your new identity. And from that identity, infinite possibilities open up that were never visible from where you used to stand. The hidden code was never really hidden. It was always broadcasting, always available, always waiting for you to develop the inner technology to receive it. Now you have that technology. Now you understand the system. Now you know how to consciously navigate the quantum field of subconscious timelines. What timeline will you claim as yours? The choice, as always, is broadcasting from within you, waiting for your conscious alignment to make it real. Your highest timeline self is calling. Are you ready to answer?